In the first year of the pandemic, a new billionaire was created every 17 hours. Every 17 hours. Now, this slowed some in the second year, dropping the average to a new billionaire being created every 30 hours. So while you slept, while you tried to figure out how to work remotely, while you worried about whether your elderly parents or your friends would survive another wave of COVID, while nurses worked triple shifts, makeshift ICUs, for 2 years, every 30 hours, someone crossed the threshold into wealth so incomprehensible it could never be spent in 10 lifetimes. The world's 10 richest men more than doubled their fortunes from $700 billion to $1.5 trillion. That's $15,000 every second. Per second, every second. While 160 million people were pushed into poverty, and while women collectively lost $800 billion in earnings, the gap between rich and poor became a chasm so wide you could fit entire nations inside of it. And some of this was due to price gouging, but much of it seems to simply have been the design, right? The market, whatever that is, the market that we hear about. The market knew that scarcity and vulnerability would make some people very rich, even if it meant others had to suffer. But this isn't a story about greed. This is a story about sacrifice. In September, we talked about the need for church. Not because it's important to cling to old buildings or old ways of doing things, but because our society, our culture is fragmenting, and we need places to grow wise. We need places where we can join others in the search for wisdom and mutual aid. Now, this month we're going to explore what's at stake if we don't take up that challenge. There's an old line that goes, one definition of insanity is doing the same things you've always done but expecting different outcomes. But there's more at stake than just individual sanity. There's more to be lost than just individual lives. And at the heart of this crisis in our culture are two ancient words that almost no one remembers anymore, Moloch and Acedia. And today we're going to talk about Moloch. Next week we're going to talk about Acedia. And the week after that, we're going to explore a vision of living differently together. Now, the word Moloch comes to us from Leviticus. In chapter 18, we read the Hebrew God laying down the law and prohibitions, and Moloch is first mentioned serendipitously enough in the line just before the one that the fundamentalists use to condemn gay people. It reads, "You shall not give any of your children to devote them by fire to Moloch, and so profane the name of your God." But then 2 chapters later, in Leviticus 20, the God expands his condemnation to include the whole community, and this will be important later in the sermon. And the passage reads, "Say to the people of Israel, and any man of the people of Israel, or the strangers that sojourn in Israel, who gives any of his children to Moloch, shall be put to death. The people of the land shall stone him with stones. I myself will set my face against that man and will cut him off from among his people, because he has given one of his children to Moloch, defiling my sanctuary and profaning my holy name. And if the people of the land do all hide their eyes from that man when he gives one of his children to Moloch, and do not put him to death, then I will set my face against that man and against his family, and cut them off from among the people, him and all who follow him in playing the harlot of Moloch." Because, this is important because there's an old God living among us. And he's been collecting his tribute for thousands of years. It's a story it's a story of people sacrificing the future for rewards in the moment. Now, according to the story, the way the story goes in the Hebrew Bible, people built up these places of fire. Topheth is what they were called. In the valley of Hinnom, right outside Jerusalem, and parents brought their children not because they were evil, but because the harvest had failed, because the enemy was at the gates, because Moloch promised victory and abundance and survival only if you would throw what you love most into the flames. It is a story of people willing to sacrifice the future for treasure today. And for much of history, we've referred to Moloch as a competing god, right? A competing god to the Hebrew God. And it's understandable because if you read the text that way, it does kind of sound it sounds like there's another god. But some modern researchers suggest that it actually describes a type of sacrifice, a Moloch sacrifice, a category of offering. And it's not a god that's making demands, but a system that extracts tribute from us. And John Milton in Paradise Lost reimagines Moloch as one of Satan's fallen angels. Moloch becomes the fiercest spirit that fought in heaven, the one who argues for a permanent war against God, for self-destruction in the name of revenge. Milton calls him the horrid king besmeared with blood of human sacrifice and parents' tears. But Milton's Moloch isn't demanding worship. He's demanding that everyone double down on a losing strategy, because to do otherwise would be to admit defeat. 3 centuries later, Allen Ginsberg looked at the 1950s in America and saw Moloch everywhere, not in temples, but in the architecture of modern life. Moloch whose mind is pure machinery. Moloch whose blood is running money. He saw Moloch in the factories that destroyed the bodies of workers, in the suburbs that swallowed identities, in the military-industrial complex that made weapons instead of homes. Ginsberg's Moloch was no longer external. It was the air we breathed. Moloch, in whom I sit lonely, he wrote. Moloch, in whom I am a consciousness without a body. More recently, philosopher Scott Alexander describes Moloch as a coordination failure. He invites us to imagine ourselves like fish farmers. And he says, there's 10 of us, and there are 9 other fish farmers, and we share a lake, and each of us makes $1,000 a month. But the waste from the 10 fish farms pollute the lake, costing us $1,000 a month. So someone invents a filter, but it costs $300 to operate, but it cleans our waste. So everyone installs one, and now we're making $700 profit, which isn't so bad. But then one farmer, let's call him Donald, gets tired of paying the $300 for his filter, so he disconnects it. And now Donald is making $1,000 while everyone else makes $700, and everyone sees Donald making the money, so they all disconnect their filters too, and eventually no one's making any profit because the lake is poisoned again. And then Donald goes around saying, we need to make a voluntary pact that we all need to use filters, but there's always someone who opts out and the cycle begins again. I've heard this also described as no one on the Tour de France wants to dope. But they know that if they don't, they're going to lose. So everyone does. Right? This is Moloch. It's not a God making demands. It's a logic that traps good people into bad systems because someone is willing to sacrifice the future for rewards today. We're seeing this. I don't know what we're seeing south of the border, but it's unfolding in real time. I really don't. I think it's unprecedented. We don't know what we're seeing. But they're following this plan, this Heritage Foundation Project 2025 plan, which calls for the deconstructing of the administrative state, where tens of thousands of merit-based civil servants are being replaced with political loyalists. And it's not about improving government, it's about sacrificing long-term institutional stability for short-term ideological gain. And the chaos we're witnessing down there isn't just from this president. It was the seeds were sown years ago, decades ago, when Reagan stood up on a podium in 1981 and proclaimed that government was the problem, not the solution. And he gutted regulations and slashed taxes and gave money to the wealthy and broke unions and created the very incentives that now reward companies for destroying communities. They called it trickle-down economics, but 40 years later, nothing has trickled down but debt and despair and a gig economy where no one has any health insurance and everyone is one car payment away from bankruptcy. And we might tell ourselves that can't happen here. We're in Canada. But the same networks that are funding the American polarization have deep roots in Canada. The Fraser Institute, our most prominent conservative think tank, receives substantial funding from the Koch Foundation and the Sarah Scaife Foundation, the same American money that's fueling the U.S. conservative movement. This isn't a parallel evolution. The disinformation campaigns that have destabilized America have come here to roost. It's an integrated transnational ecosystem, and the border can't protect us because capital recognizes no borders except the ones that keep refugees out. And the rot is here, right? In our last federal election, more than 1/4 of Canadians were exposed to sophisticated fake political content on social media, fraudulent cryptocurrency ads masking themselves as news articles. Our public infrastructure is crumbling. Canada's infrastructure deficit exceeds $100 billion. We've chosen short-term tax cuts for long-term stability, and then we're surprised when bridges fail or transit systems collapse. 1 in 3 academic staff in Canada now works on a temporary contract. These are not unqualified people. They hold PhDs. They teach our children, and they earn 80% less than their tenured colleagues, the ones that are doing the same work. And we're sacrificing our next generation of scholars and the quality of education itself. Trust in Canadian media has plunged from 55% in 2016 to 40% in 2023. We're not just losing faith in our institutions, we're losing our shared reality, the common ground that we need for democracy to function. And the cost isn't just institutional or financial, it's a spiritual wounding as well. The first wound is this loneliness that is everywhere. 58% of older Canadians have experienced loneliness, and they're now linking this to a severe health impact, where they're saying that this extreme loneliness that's out there is equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That's how much it shortens life. And it's not a personal failure, it's a systemic breakdown. Modern capitalism generates loneliness. It replaces communal bonds with market transactions, and it demands geographic mobility for employment, and it pulls us up from our roots, and it prioritizes automobiles over pedestrians. And the system makes money by pulling us apart, keeping us apart. The second wound is acedia, and we're going to get to this more next week, but acedia comes to us from the Greek word, and it means to just lack care, right? It's not laziness. Sometimes people talk about acedia as apathy, but it's not. It's more insidious. It's a restless anxious inability to care about what truly matters. And so we run around and we fill our lives because we don't know where meaning is anymore. The third wound is this learned helplessness that has just come over us. Research has shown that when people repeatedly perceive their actions as having no impact on the systems governing their lives, they develop now what they're calling learned helplessness. It breeds political cynicism and civic disengagement. Why vote? Why organize? Why even try? And it's a vicious cycle. Our withdrawal weakens the very institutions that might solve our problems. And it leaves these unaccountable systems free to perpetuate the conditions that are causing our sense of helplessness. And we're trapped in this cage that we could escape only if we believed that escape were possible. And the fourth wound really is moral injury. This word has come to us from military psychiatry, and it describes a soul wound that is of perpetuating and failing to prevent or witnessing acts that violate your deepest morals. So when soldiers see and witness horrible things, they come home with moral injury, they say. But you don't have to be a soldier to experience it anymore. Healthcare workers describe feeling complicit in a system that is increasingly less equipped to provide quality care. And teachers are being forced to administer these tests that are meaningless. And social workers are prevented by budget cuts from helping families that they know are suffering. And this moral injury manifests as guilt and shame and anger. And it's not because we're bad people, but because the system is forcing us to violate our conscience to survive. And this is what Moloch costs. It's not just money or infrastructure or institutions, it's our souls. And the truth that we have to face is that we're not just victims of it, like we're participants in it. Every time someone stays silent when someone is harmed, every time we accept the logic of that's just how things work, or every time we choose our comfort over someone else's survival, we're throwing another log onto Moloch's fire. And this isn't about personal guilt. It's about recognizing our place in the web. Right? We're caught and complicit, suffering and participating. And that recognition that we're not just being crushed by the machine, but helping to turn its gears is where some of this work really lies. Many of us are living with this suffocating sense of anxiety, afraid of what lurks for us in the future, perhaps feeling as if we've already lost. And I don't mean lost in an election or a policy battle, but we've lost the possibility of a world where our children can afford homes, where democracy. It's easy to feel hopeless, to look at the scale of these problems and to conclude that Moloch has already won. This is what the spiritual teachers call the dark night of the soul, what activists call the nihilistic abyss. It's the moment when you realize that the monster isn't at the gates, but it's in the house. It's in our retirement funds that are invested in fossil fuels. It's in the Amazon package that was delivered to my doorstep. And the system knows exactly what it's doing, as if it were alive, as if it were a malevolent God. Every time housing activists propose policies to lower prices, the response is swift. You can't lower housing prices, that would destroy retirement savings. Just think about that logic for a second, right? They're explicitly saying our children's homelessness is the price we must pay for our retirement security. Generations are being pitted against each other, forcing us to choose between our parents' dignity and our children's future. It's a good question about whether we can live an ethical life in this machine. We see the system, we feel its cost, and here's the choice. Do we retreat into private life, tending our gardens, protecting what's ours, focus on individual spiritual practice, personal resilience? It's not wrong. It's not wrong to protect yourself in a burning world. But every retreat feeds Moloch's another victory. Or we could lean in. We could act collectively to repattern our lives, knowing that it will be difficult and slow and that we may never succeed in conventional terms. But it's the only way for us to want to attempt to reclaim some of our integrity. You know, the first antidote, Eva really spoke about this in her brilliant homily, is communal care. Communal care. And I think of the Black Panthers with their free breakfast program, and they fed tens of thousands of children before school every day. Not because they were running a charity, but because feeding children was revolutionary. So revolutionary that the government had to destroy them. But it showed that communities could meet their own needs without the market, without Moloch. And the second antidote is contemplative practice, spiritual practice. Thich Nhat Hanh said, we have to resist the speed, the losing of ourselves, and therefore we must organize a resistance. Spending 2 hours with a cup of tea during a tea meditation is an act of resistance. I think that tea is going to get cold, but you understand what he's saying, like slowing down, understanding what this life is. Moloch doesn't just want your labor. He wants your attention. Every notification, every ping, every headline, every crisis is designed to keep you reactive, to keep you exhausted, to keep you from thinking. Exactly. Moloch, get behind me, Satan. No, seriously though, it's designed to keep us from thinking clearly about what matters. Our own spiritual nourishment is the very engine that can power us through this, through thoughtful action in the world. Contemplation is an act of resistance. When we stop, when we breathe, when we create stillness in the world that profits from noise, we are taking back our attention from the machine. The third antidote is civic repair. Not angry politics, not rage tweeting, not the performative activism that social media rewards as much as I love it. I engage in it as much as I love it. But the patient spiritual work of mending what is broken. We cannot slay Moloch overnight. We may never slay Moloch. It's been around forever. The machine is big, it's entrenched, it's woven into the fabric of how we live. But we can stop feeding him. Every time we choose community over isolation, every time we choose contemplation over consumption, every time we choose repair over rage, we are creating pockets of resistance, small spaces where life, not profit, is sacred. Mutual aid invites community members to take care of one another through shared respect, ending our dependence on a system that derives profit from taking care of one another. It's not a utopian fantasy. It's what humans have always done for us, for each other, that we take care of each other. This is the work of the wisdom school. Not to give you answers, not to make you feel better, but to help you practice. Practice community when isolation would be easier. Practice contemplation when reaction would be faster. Practice repair when destruction might feel more satisfying. Will it work? Will it win? No, these, I think, are the wrong questions. The right question is, how do we want to live? If we're going to lose, and maybe we will, let's lose together, taking care of each other, rather than alone feeding the machine that's killing us. If we're going to fight, and I think we must, let's fight with love and with patience, with the deep knowledge that the goal is to bring about a situation where everybody can share in the fruits of their activities with everyone else without the need of compensation. That's the vision. Not winning, but becoming. Becoming people who choose each other over the market. Becoming communities that practice different values. The choice is ours. What are we going to do?